We are hardwired to avoid pain. People go to great lengths to stay safe and to avoid negative consequences. Unfortunately, this relationship we have with aversion to negative consequences also extends to our relationship with honesty. Now, we need to one day have a conversation about making society a society that's conducive to honesty. But that's not the conversation we need to have today. Today we need to have a conversation about the willingness and the bravery to be honest, even when there are consequences within society, rather than powerlessly waiting for society to make it okay to be honest. Also, for this specific conversation that we're going to have today, it makes no sense for us to get into a conversation around the morality of honesty and dishonesty. That's not today's conversation, because you could actually argue that it's more moral to be dishonest in certain circumstances. If you don't believe me, just think back to World War II. If you were harboring Jews in Germany and a Nazi knocked on your door, is it really moral just because honesty is moral to be like, yes, I'm hiding Jews upstairs? You see, we could go down a rabbit hole I don't want to go down for this particular conversation. While every one of us is going to find ourselves in a situation, at least in our lifetime, where we are going to be dishonest, we're not going to tell the truth, there are some people who will not be honest as long as there is any negative consequence for that honesty. If you're one of these people, your life will end up devolving into a game of strategy rather than authenticity. Rather than speaking and acting in alignment with your own truth, you will strategically speak and act in order to avoid consequences and in order to get whatever you want from others. This includes reactions you want. Regardless of whether that causes you to be out of alignment with your own truth, you become a strategic person instead of an honest person. If you're someone who is not willing to share your truth unless you perceive there to be no negative consequence for sharing that truth, you have a very conditional relationship with your own truth, with honesty in general. You're somebody who makes other people responsible for making it safe first in order for you to be able to be honest. There are big red letters, big problems with doing this. Problems that don't only lead to other people's pain. Problems that lead to the absolute demise of your life. In order to have a life worth living, you're going to have to change your relationship to your honesty and your truth. You're going to have to change your relationship to consequences. The first problem with only being willing to be honest, if you can guarantee that there will be no negative consequences for that honesty, is that it defies universal law. This universe, this time-space reality that you are currently inhabiting, is based off of the law of mirroring and also the law of cause and effect. There is no such thing as anything that does not have a reflection. There is no such thing as anything that does not have an effect. Another way of saying this, literally everything has a reflection and a consequence. Everything. And by everything, this includes honesty. The reason that there's less of a consequence for your honesty with certain people is down to a whole host of factors. Of course, if you walk into a therapist's office and you tell them that you killed someone, being mandatory reporters, all of a sudden you're going to be standing in front of a police officer. So there's a consequence for that honesty. So we can't even make blanket statements about there being no consequence for telling a therapist, but there is usually less consequences for telling a therapist, because nothing that you tell them genuinely affects their life. For example, let's say that you're a man who's been married to a woman for 12 years and you go into a therapist's office and tell the therapist that you're gay. There will be no negative consequence for that because the fact that you're gay doesn't change anything for that therapist. That truth does not negatively impact them. The therapist can validate that truth for you and accept it and put you more at peace with that truth. However, if you go home and you tell the woman who you've been married to for 12 years that you're gay, that's going to be a very different effect, very different consequence. And it's cruel for you to expect her to make sure there will be no negative consequence and no negative reaction to sharing that truth. For example, It's total cruelty to expect that she's going to have only a positive reaction to that, or that she's going to guarantee you that she's not going to ask you for a divorce in order for you to be okay to tell her that you're gay. You may imagine that it is possible to think, say, or do something that has no consequence. But this is not possible. You need to swallow the idea that everything you say, or do, or even think has a consequence. Also, everything you don't think, don't say, and don't do also has a consequence. When we're someone who is only willing to be honest if there are no negative consequences for our honesty, we're often acutely aware of the consequences of being honest. But we're ignorant of the consequences of not being honest. But guess what? There will always be consequences for both. For example, it's pretty easy to see that the man in our example will experience consequences as a result of saying that he is gay. However, there are also big consequences for the man in our example never being honest that he's gay. So many people who have this relationship, this conditional relationship with being honest, based off of them needing it to be safe first in order for them to be honest. You'll hear them say things like this: well, I was just being honest. When they say this, there's an idea that the fact that they're being honest should make it so that there is no negative reaction, or should make it so that there is no negative consequence. I think a better way of saying this is that the fact that they're honest, they often think should in and of itself make it so that the other person's wrong to have a negative reaction to their truth, or is wrong for there being some effect in response to the cause of their honesty. It's kind of like they think their honesty should be an exemption from there being any negative response or negative consequence for that honesty. If you're somebody who falls into this pattern, what I want you to think about is that you yourself could never grant somebody this level of amnesty. If you don't believe me, I want you to imagine that you're in a relationship, not a relationship, you're married, and your spouse walks in the door one day and says, I'm in love with someone else. There is no way that you could guarantee that person that you're going to have no negative reaction. You can't do that. That is not something you can promise. So you would still have a negative reaction, they would still feel guilty, you would probably not want to have sex with him or her, and you would end up feeling more distant, distrustful, and in marriage counseling, if not sleeping in different rooms or divorced. If they said, what? I was just being honest, as if to make you wrong for having that negative reaction and wrong for there being negative consequences for sharing that truth, that would be cruelty. And if they needed the condition of no reaction and no consequences in order to be able to share that truth with you, you absolutely could not make them safe enough to be able to share that truth of theirs. Here's another example. I want you to imagine that you own a company, and you have an employee that is, in fact, stealing trade secrets so as to build up their own business because their personal truth is that you're a bad person, and they believe that a better person deserves to have the corner of the market, a better person than you. Now imagine that this employee needs you to have no reaction and needs there to be no negative consequences in order to be honest with you about this. You're not going to be able to give them that because there's no way for you to be emotionally fine with this being the truth of them, especially being still employed by you. There's also no way for you to continue to keep them on in the company if this is their truth and if this is what they are doing. So you're going to fire them. There's no way for you to make it safe enough for them to be honest. You are a person who is trapped and disempowered if you will only be honest if other people make there be no consequences for that honesty of yours, and if you're unwilling to take the responsibility for the consequences of your honesty. In order to get out of that trap and be at the cause instead of at the effect of your life, you're going to have to get seriously conscious about the consequences of being honest and the consequences of not being honest in any given situation. And you're going to have to play those consequences out over time. And rather than expecting those consequences to not be there, consciously choose your consequences. If you want to learn more about how this bravery leads you to a much more empowered life, you can watch my video titled Why You Should Consciously Choose Consequences. One of the consequences of being only willing to share the honest truth, as long as people can guarantee there will be no consequences for that honesty, is that you are in fact choosing a life of separation, of aloneness. not only are you choosing a life of separation and aloneness, you're also choosing a relationship that is not real. A relationship is only real when you are in a relationship with the reality of someone. That means if you're not putting your honesty forth from the get-go, not I'm going to lie to you and then tell you the truth, right? The only way to be in a real relationship with somebody is if you're setting up the reality of yourself from the get-go. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're setting up an illusion. You're essentially crafting an overlay for the other person to be in a relationship with. You're setting up a relationship that is not real. To understand more about this, you can watch my video titled Overlay: What Prevents You from Having a Real Relationship. Also, you're making sure that there's always distance, separation, between you and the other person, thereby making both of you alone. Intimacy is only possible when you see, hear, feel, and know someone. So if you're not putting your honesty forward in any way, they're not going to see, feel, hear, or know you, and vice versa. This means that by not being honest, you're essentially signing up for creating that distance in the relationship, and you're signing up for being alone within your relationships. Vibrationally speaking, it might be really interesting for you to know something. When there are cases where honesty leads to some form of distancing consequence, like I was honest and therefore we ended up breaking up, vibrationally speaking, the two people who just experienced that distancing consequence are in fact closer to each other after the fact than they were before that honesty was spoken, even if there's a distancing consequence like a breakup that happens as a result of it. Another of these consequences that you will experience as a result of making it so your honesty is totally dependent upon other people making it safe for you to be able to be honest is all the pain that comes with codependency. Codependency is not a personality disorder. Codependency is a relationship strategy that we learn in dysfunctional households. But it's a strategy that will lead you straight down the road to relationship hell. In a handbasket. You will conform to whatever other people want and forfeit your selfhood in exchange for getting only some of your needs met and feeling only kind of safer. Your entire life will be a compromise. And as if not being able to live the life you really want isn't bad enough, you will be constantly reinforcing a self-concept of shame. You will perpetuate your own enmeshment trauma over the course of your adult life. To learn more about this, you can watch my video titled How to Heal Family Enmeshment Trauma. Another of the consequences that you will experience for not being honest, until you can guarantee there will be no negative consequences for that honesty, is that you will never be able to build trust in a relationship. The dishonesty itself takes trust off the table for both you and them. This means all of your relationships will be insecure and unsafe. To learn more about this, watch my video titled Trust: What is Trust and How to Build Trust in Relationships. Another of the consequences that you will experience as a result of not being honest, unless you can guarantee that that honesty is not going to lead to a negative consequence, is that your relationships are going to be exhausting and unfulfilling, and they're going to be nothing but a constant 24-hour strategy game. This means in your relationships, if you're like this, you will be playing chess 24 hours a day. No one can keep that up. It's exhausting and it's anxiety producing, and you can't keep it up. So you're going to be somebody in your relationships who needs to withdraw from your relationships and spend a whole lot of time alone, because inauthenticity takes a lot of time and energy. Remember how I said that something that takes a lot of time and energy and focus is not something that can be maintained across time? The truth of you will inevitably come out. And when that happens, may God have mercy on your relationships, because it's not going to be received well. When the truth comes out, no one's going to be able to respect you. Being in this constant strategy mode in relationships makes relationships painful, makes them depleting, makes them exhausting, makes them super difficult. Another of these consequences that you will experience as a result of not being honest unless you can guarantee that there's going to be no negative consequence for that honesty is that you are going to lose touch with your personal truth. When we suppress, deny, disown, don't acknowledge, and speak and act to the opposite of what our truth actually is, eventually we end up not knowing what it is. We have to start pretending, lying, omitting, deceiving, misleading, and being inauthentic to ourselves. We become lost as a result. We become confused. We can't make the right decisions for our own life, and we become susceptible to just going along with other people and adopting their truth as our own. We also become susceptible to manipulation. What all of this means is that personal happiness is literally out of our reach. And we don't have that compass in life telling us what is actually true for us anymore. So how can you make any of the right decisions for you in your life? How can you even find your purpose? There is no way to maintain mental, emotional, and physical health and to stay on the right track for you if you lose touch with your personal truth. And you will if you have this much of a conditional relationship with your truth. Another consequence that you will line up with if you are somebody who is not honest unless you can guarantee that there will be no negative consequence for that honesty is that you will never, and I mean never, find people, places, and things that you're actually compatible to. In fact, you're dooming yourself to a life of incompatibility. You will, of course, have to justify this by telling yourself that compromise and accommodation is right and good. You'll have to minimize the importance of compatibility. But dooming yourself to a life of incompatibility is a recipe for constant conflict with others, constant pain, constant sacrifice, and also constant shame. To learn more about this, you can watch my video titled Incompatibility, a Harsh Reality in Relationships. Another of these consequences that you will experience as a result of not being honest unless you can guarantee there's no negative consequences for that honesty is that you are perpetuating a dishonest world. Deceit is contagious. We can consider ourselves to be part of the problem if we speak and act in a way that normalizes dishonesty and inauthenticity. When we act in our own best interest to the point of pretense, to the point of lying, to the point of omission, to the point of deceiving, to the point of misleading and being inauthentic, we help to establish this as the norm for our society. And then, we are ensuring there will always be consequences for honesty. We're creating the very thing that is causing us so much pain. If you are someone who struggles with being honest, whenever there's a negative consequence potentially for that honesty, you will be tempted to rationalize, reframe, justify, and come up with excuses for your dishonesty. This is what I need you to know. You're always going to be able to find an excuse. You're always going to be able to reframe it. You're always going to be able to justify it. You're always going to be able to rationalize it. The question is, where does that rationalization, justification, reframing, and those excuses actually get you? There is always a why behind dishonesty. And knowing that why behind dishonesty can go a long way towards helping you to predict what that consequence of that dishonesty will be. Not being honest has its benefits, otherwise people wouldn't do it. And the truth has consequences. Otherwise, people wouldn't lie. But if you want well-being in your life, and if you want real relationships, you need to consciously choose your consequences rather than expecting other people to make those consequences not be there. This means that even though all of us in the world would rather have this world be a place that is so safe that there are no consequences for honesty, if you want a life that is remotely worth living, then guess what? Your honesty cannot always be conditional upon your safety. Have a good week. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and consider sharing this video with your friends. You can also click on the bell icon to be notified of the next time that I post a video. I want to thank you personally for the bravery that you have to step into awareness. I'll see you in the next video.